Hello, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to this session. Today I will be joined by Jeroen van der Leer, joining remotely. It's COVID time, so Jeroen has to work from home. And welcome, Jeroen. Jeroen is cloud consultant at Oblivion Cloud Control, and today we will be talking about compelling reasons to go to the public cloud. Jeroen, can you please introduce yourself and the topic?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stijn. So first of all, I want to apologize about my voice. I've got a really bad cold, and I've had to isolate myself in my home office. And I will let the audience draw their own conclusions. Anyway, continuing, my name is Jeroen van der Leer. I have a background in the financial services industry. I worked there for more than 20 years in various roles, ranging from installing end-user equipment at the beginning of my career, all the way to leading large projects and teams. Lastly, I worked as a chief product owner of the AWS cloud platform at a bank, and later I did something similar at an insurance group. So it's fair to say I have a bit of experience in FSI. So as I said, I worked in FSI, and during the last years that I worked in the financial services industry, I worked mostly on cloud adoption, in particular AWS. So at the time, the bank I worked for chose to adopt the cloud because they had a few problems which the cloud was likely to solve. One of those problems was that it took a long time for DevOps teams to get the infrastructure which they needed to deliver business value. The other problem that they wanted to solve was that teams were looking for technology which just was not available in the data center. So in our early successes there really opened my eyes to the cloud and got me enthusiastic about AWS. I'll also admit that being able to fly business class to reInvent every year helped. Regrettably, in the industry that I work in now, flying business class is not customary. Anyway, so since becoming a consultant at Oblivion a few years ago, I worked with several customers, and they all had their own reasons for choosing public cloud. So we decided to publish a white paper describing the main reasons for organizations to adopt public cloud and which challenges they might face along the way. So the white paper is based on 15 years of Oblivion experience, and there are a lot of contributions from my colleagues who lead different practice leads. And we've been helping customers successfully adopt the cloud for over 15 years. So during the next 20 to 30 minutes, I'd like to talk about those reasons for organizations to move to the public cloud and also the challenges that they might face. So back to you, Stijn.
Yeah, thanks, Jeroen. Thanks for introducing yourself. One thing that comes to mind, it's 2021. Do we actually need compelling reasons to go to public cloud? Because this is the industry standard, by the way, this time, right?
I mean, yes. So when we talk about moving to the cloud, we also now have customers who wouldn't even consider anything else but the cloud. So I suppose it's safe to say these days that the cloud is the standard. So if you were to start up a new business, probably you would save yourself the hassle of building a data center. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, in a way. In the end, friends don't let friends build data centers. And I think if you start a business now, it doesn't make sense to build a data center. If you are running a business in a data center, then you have to think a little bit about what is really important for you. But still, I think public cloud should be somewhere on your roadmap. It can be today, it can be tomorrow, but it can also be within a couple of years, of course. Can you talk a little bit about the compelling reasons and which one you have identified? That organizations are basically faced with when they want to move to public cloud.
Sure. No problem at all. So I'd like to point out that we do have a QR code where you can download our white paper if you want to do so. It's being shown right now. So feel free to download it. It will give you a little bit more background information, also maybe a little bit more time to read about our experiences. But the 5 main reasons that we see within our customers, which they have to choose public cloud, are as follows. One is access to new technology. I think the cloud is well known for offering over 100 different services in AWS's case alone, ranging from virtual machines and storage, so your basic IaaS, to machine learning and artificial intelligence. So that's one reason. The other reason is security. If you look at how much cloud service providers invest in security, it's hard to believe that individual organizations would be better at security. The other is scalability. So if you've ever been successful and needed more resources in your data center, or you had to scale down because of bad times, you know how important scalability is. Then, of course, I would say speed and agility is an important reason. Not only me, but our customers are indicating the same thing. Being able to adapt to changing circumstances and time to market is widely believed to be a differentiator. And the other one, the last one I would say, is costs. So who doesn't want to reduce costs or change the structure of their costs at least? So all those reasons, or if you want objectives, come with their own challenges, and people should be ready for those when they move to the cloud. So I will probably elaborate on each of those objectives a little bit more as we continue.
Yeah, thanks for setting the stage. Can you take us to the first one? So that's access to new technology.
Absolutely, yeah. I really love this one because I think you and I worked on the same case. So I worked at a place where the business was streaming to enable push notifications for mobile devices. So an IT had been going through a vendor selection process, which took a long time. They wanted to see which vendor solution in a data center would make most sense, which would work out the best economically. And they, to be honest, they took a long time to go through the process. And it became clear at some point that they would not meet the deadlines which the business had set. So a couple of developers got together and they developed a prototype using some AWS services. To be specific, API Gateway, Lambda, and simple notification service. So they developed this prototype and the business was enthusiastic when it was demoed to them. And in the end, we were live within weeks and not months, which is how long it would have taken in the data center. So just by using public cloud, we were able to meet the deadlines which the business had set. So had we not done this, probably we would have fallen behind the competition. So, and of course, I mean, you can imagine having access to a lot of new technologies does come with a few challenges. And the first one that I would like to mention is that you probably want to foster a culture of experimentation with all these new services. So you want to let teams get acquainted with these services and see what the possibilities are. At the same time, you feel the need as an IT organization to govern all these choices that are being made. It's no secret that architecture will want a stake in this game. So, and that's also, with all these relatively unknown services, establishing standards, for instance, for security, can also become a challenge. But I still feel it's up to IT to make sure accidents don't happen. And lastly, you should also assess the risk of vendor locking, or as we prefer to call it, determine what the switching costs are. Since you're free to part ways with a vendor at any time you like, there are no contracts which are binding you to that vendor for the long term. It's just that if you try to do the same thing with a different vendor or in your own data center, there might be some costs associated with switching to the other vendor or your own data center.
Yeah, I can still remember the day that you were called to the office that this cannot be true. You're telling me that you can do this for $10 a month and you can deliver it tomorrow. But yes, it was true, and we did it. And so far, it's running for the same amount, of course, as far as I know. But yeah, thanks for this one. I would want to go to the next topic, cloud security. I think that's my favorite topic. But can you please elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah, so absolutely. First of all, I need to point out the shared responsibility model. So in summary, what that is it explains that AWS, In the case of AWS, AWS is responsible for security of the cloud, and the customer is responsible for security in the cloud. So now how that works out exactly differs a little bit per service. But it's safe to assume that the cloud service provider is good at security of the cloud because, like I said before, they do this at scale. Of course, you can assume that, but it's probably your job, or it's better to check your assumptions and ask for proof that they are doing a good job. So one way would be to inspect all the documentation and proof that they provide in the form of things like SOC 2 reports. Some regulated institutions are also able to conduct individual audits on the CSP's operations. For instance, in the financial services industry, where I have some experience, due to regulatory requirements, both central banks, or the regulatory authority, have a right to inspect CSPs like AWS. But due to those same regulatory requirements, the individual institutions also have obtained the right to perform an audit, either individually or in something called a pooled audit. So I won't go into length about what that exactly is, but it is a tool you can use to check on whether or not the claims that the cloud service provider is making about security are in fact being met. But what's important is to understand how the customer responsibility works. Because if you neglect this, there is a good chance that you're going to be at risk. So you have to understand exactly which responsibility you have for security in the cloud. Because if you're assuming that your cloud service provider is performing that function, you might be mistaken and there is a risk. Okay, and the other advice is that we would give is to thoroughly understand which threats you face. Those threats may be different from what you're used to. So maybe in your data center, you used to be very worried about hardening your operating systems, and you had extensive sheets with configurations that you had to implement. And those may still be valid, those concerns, but maybe in the cloud, you should be worried about something like somebody stealing your credentials. Because once somebody gets all of your credentials, it can have far-reaching implications. And I do have the battle scars to prove that. And lastly, there's a well-architected framework which we would always recommend that you learn about and which you apply. It's something AWS shares with you as a customer. It contains a security pillar. Apply it. It's going to be of great benefit, especially since you might be using services in AWS which you have no experience with in your data center. So some sound advice there. So security is a good reason to move to the cloud. Cloud service providers do a great job, but please understand that you have a responsibility as well. And the better you understand that, the better you understand the threats which might face you, the better you will be at securing your workloads in the cloud.
Yeah, thanks. So from security, let's move on to the next topic, scalability.
Yeah, so how often do we hear about websites being down due to unexpected demand or peaks in demand? You could be losing money because your customers simply can't place orders, or members of the public are not able to schedule a COVID-19 test. I mean, how embarrassing would that be? But with the appropriate architecture, of course, you can address all these risks in the cloud, and your cloud service provider will make sure that there are enough resources available to process all the traffic to your website or to do whatever processing that you need to do. So try that in your data center where lead times can be months, right? Try to get some new storage, try to get some new compute in your data center. A lot of people are going to have to sign off. Then there's the logistics and so forth. So enter the cloud. You pay for what you consume. So now the challenge here can be that finance departments are accustomed to seeing fairly flat bills, and they don't like spikes in bills. But spikes are what results from paying for what you consume, because you might be consuming more in one month and less in the other month. It also depends on the success of your business. So make it transparent to finance. That would be our advice. And discuss the impact before it hits. So let them know that there are going to be bills coming which are going to fluctuate a little bit. And the other piece of advice that we would give is look closely at architecting for scalability. So it can be a challenge for all the workloads, but if you don't invest in modernizing, you're not going to benefit from the scalability that the cloud offers.
Yeah, and something I would like to add, because people normally tend to forget that we are always aiming for scalability in scaling up, but I think with cloud it's also important to be able to scale down, to optimize the cost basically. Thanks, Jeroen. Let's move on swiftly to the speed and agility topic.
So I think you choose the right word, swiftly. Speed and agility. So I think agile has become a little bit of a buzzword, and maybe some people have become a little bit allergic to it. Say agile one more time. But in a business environment where windows of opportunity are very short sometimes, and customers demand certain apps or new functionality tomorrow, you've got to be agile. You've got to be able to understand threats and opportunities in your market very quickly. Because if you don't, you might simply face going out of business. Now, the cloud can help you a great deal, I think, there. Okay, so we already discussed that the cloud provider will provide resources according to your scalability requirements. You don't have to wait till hardware arrives and is installed in the data center. So that's a huge benefit. But there are a few challenges that you should be aware of. And those are challenges that we have actually witnessed with some of our customers who've chosen the cloud for reasons of speed and agility. And from our experience, we'd like to share those with you. So first of all, to get the maximum benefit, why not use services a little bit higher up in the stack? Okay, so why not provision? So why would you provision virtual machines which you need to maintain in the long run if you can run the code in a runtime environment like Lambda? So think about this before you start developing by choosing the right architecture. So reduce legacy now and avoid legacy in the future. So we have seen customers lift and shift and expect miracles. And the truth is that, yes, the capacity will be there in the cloud, and if you need more, it will be there as well. But you're not getting all the benefits that you could. So, and the other challenge, I would say, is that lead times are determined by a chain of events. So if it takes 6 months to hand over a new applications to your IT operations team, reducing the time it takes to get the resources provisioned by a few weeks isn't going to make such a big dent in your lead times. So it's very likely that you should have invested and implemented CI/CD and DevOps practices where you avoid a situation where handoffs determine lead times. So not to mention the fact that you might be handing over an application which you developed in the cloud and which uses technologies or AWS services which the ops team is reluctant to support. Yeah, so what we witness with our customers is that they are transitioning to cloud and DevOps and CI and implementing CI/CD all at the same time, and that can make things very challenging. At the same time, if you don't, then you're not likely to reap all the benefits that you could be reaping in the cloud.
Yeah, and larger organizations, they tend to be risk averse. Does speed and agility also helps in terms of creating a culture of experimenting, for example? Well,
I think that's certainly the case, right? So what is the risk of experimentation? There's the risk of failure. If you accept that you do things in small increments, of course, the risk of failure also becomes smaller. And you can do all those things in the cloud, right? You can experiment, and if it doesn't work for you, you just turn things off, and you don't look back. There are no investments in the long run, which are going to haunt you for the next 3, 4, maybe 5 years.
Yeah, thanks. We've heard 4 stories, 4 reasons basically. Can you tell me a little bit more about the latest part, the cost part?
Yes, absolutely. So, and this is an area where I work with customers a lot, creating business cases and whatnot. And so I will admit, in the beginning of the cloud, my assumption was that the cloud is always cheaper because cloud service providers can do things at scale. So they buy their hardware at huge discounts, and that's why it's cheaper. So the reality is a little bit different. And for that, I think we have to look a little bit deeper. So what we mean by cost is not just lower cost, right? We also mean the structure of cost. I think a lot of people have heard about the move from capital expenditure to operational expenditure, which is different, right? CapEx, you invest, you amortize, you depreciate. OpEx is just paying the cloud provider for what you've consumed. So it changes the structure of your costs. And in essence, what happens is that your costs become very variable, and they are driven by consumption. So in the past, controlling investments in capacity in the data center were an effective way to control costs, right? So you had to go to an investment board to get permission to buy more hardware. Now, in the cloud, it's all about controlling consumption. Your teams will call an AWS API, and the AWS API is very happy to fulfill your order for additional resources. So it's all about controlling consumption. And it isn't reasonable to accept that a server in the cloud, which you pay per minute, is cheaper than a server in your data center to which you've committed for the next 5 years by putting on your balance sheet. Right? That's just not reasonable. And when you do those comparisons, you get business cases where the cloud is either marginally cheaper or not cheaper at all. So when you create a business case, it has to be like for like. Okay, that's one of the advices that we would give. And actually, when you create a business case, one of the first challenges that we see with customers when we do this is, well, first of all, they don't understand the value framework entirely, so we explain it to them. Right? There is more value to moving to the cloud than just lowering costs. And the second is that when you ask customers, how much does your current environment cost? They have difficulty answering that question. Because they have a lot of sunk or hidden or indirect costs, which they don't totally know about. So it does take a bit of time before we have some transparency in their current costs. And we can help them. We often have to help them, that's my experience, by using industry benchmarks. So we estimate their costs. How much is your environment likely to cost? And then we adjust those costs a little bit by using bits of information which they do have. So potentially they have a very good discount arrangement with a certain vendor, and we can factor that in. So that's from experience. We do see customers struggling to be fully transparent about how much their current environment costs. And then there's the issue that once you move to the cloud, it's really time to control costs. Okay, so teams start consuming services by calling APIs, and they start to generate charges for which it is unclear if they have permission to incur those charges. So who gave them permission to spend that money on those services? So what we advise customers is to invest heavily in cost governance. So make sure that everybody knows what the rules of engagement are. Yeah. So how do you get permission to spend money in the cloud? Just because you can call an API and provision resources which will put charges on your bill doesn't mean you're allowed to or that you have to. What happens if you overspend? What are the consequences? How do you control that? Now, this sounds very scary, but the good thing in AWS, for instance, is that you can measure cost 4, 5, 6 times a day. So you have early warning signs that things are not going according to plan. Yeah, which is very different maybe from what you're used to in your data center. So measure often and compare it to what was agreed. So another tip that we would give is analyze your bill. You probably won't find any mistakes by the cloud service vendor, cloud service provider on the bill, but you probably will find some opportunities to save money. For instance, by committing capacity or committing to some capacity, by hunting for idle resources, which have been provisioned but aren't really being used, and they can be turned off temporarily or forever. Or you might be able to switch to some better value for money services. Okay, so at Oblivion, we have an entire practice focusing exactly on bringing down your AWS bill and bringing spend in the cloud under control. So I could talk about this topic for a long time, but I won't, because we have some experts which have also published a white paper on this topic, and you can read that white paper as well. And there are plenty of tips in there to bring cloud spend under control, and it will help you. So it will help you deliver on the objective, which is to lower or control costs, and perhaps achieve lower costs, lower IT costs than you had in your data center in the cloud.
Yeah, we have some mutual experience, I would say. It's a larger company in the Netherlands. So if you look at cost and speed and agility and autonomous teams, etc., it's really difficult to find a delicate balance between allowing them to do whatever they need versus staying in control. Do you have some best practices around this specific problem?
Well, absolutely. The first one is trust. Yeah. So, but trust means that you trust somebody to show responsible behavior. So I think the first thing you have to explain to them is, what is responsible behavior? What we've told teams is it is their obligation to keep costs as low as possible. And once they understand that, they have a new task. So what we noticed in the past, if you have very long lead times for infrastructure, teams are likely to ask for more than they actually need, because they know if they need more than they originally requested, it's going to take months. So now in the cloud, if you give them the ability to provision their own infrastructure, they will start changing their behavior. And what we saw is that they start provisioning, for instance, very small virtual machines. And when you ask them, why are you provisioning small virtual machines, they all reply the same answer. If we need a bigger one, we'll provision a bigger one. It doesn't take very long to do that. It just takes minutes. So we've seen that. But I've also witnessed a team once which started comparing serverless versus containers versus virtual machines to see which one was the most cost-effective solution. So, and they shared all that knowledge with the rest of the company, and people really got into it. I wouldn't say it became a hobby, but they became very cost aware, because they knew that they had a certain budget they had to stay within, and if the business wanted more functionality at the same cost, then they would probably have to start looking for solutions which were economically more sound. So they really started making it owning the problem, which is fantastic to see. Just by giving them the ability to provision their own stuff, made them more agile. It sped things up, and it made sure that they became more cost aware, and in the end, it would lower cost.
Yeah, and also make them more relevant in their area of expertise, of course, because they can tell their product owner that they are able to deliver more versus a lower cost, for example.
Oh, absolutely. And so another tip here in this area is, start hunting for idle resources, and give that feedback to the teams. Tell them, hey, look, we found some idle resources. Put it at the top of your top of your list of things to do. or your backlog, if you want to call it that, and fix it.
Yeah, and automate it, because it's not the nicest task to do, to be honest. If you make a nice script for this and run this every month, so to say, then you're fine.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so having all those 5 topics addressed, something came to mind. It's at this point in time, it's really difficult to find IT personnel, especially, let's say, the right personnel. Do you think public cloud plays a role in this?
So I'm a firm believer in theory, right? And I have witnessed it myself. So if you have a lot of legacy, you probably will get some legacy resources as well in terms of human resources. And if you can offer an environment where teams are able to start using modern services, they have a huge toolbox which they can choose from to solve particular customer problems, potentially even be able to develop in languages which they prefer instead of which are dictated by central IT. It definitely attracts a different crowd and a more talented crowd. I think young talent demands an environment where they can show their talent and where they're not confined to the technology of yesterday.
Or even are not familiar with the old technology because they are fresh out of school and are used and grown up as a cloud native developer. And then you don't want to face that database cluster of our friend Larry, for example, because it's
correct
out of their league. So if you look at the larger companies, especially they are struggling with finding the right reasons to go to public cloud. How does it work in regulated environments? Is it also a topic that you discuss the programs there, the SRAMS 2, GDPR, etc.?
Yeah, of course. So, public cloud has come under the scrutiny also of regulators. So they've seen large moves into public cloud, and they started expressing some concerns around, for instance, GDPR, and also being able to audit what's going on in the public cloud. And I already referred to financial services institutions, banks, obtaining the right to audit cloud service providers. So they've obtained those rights. And so what I see in practice is that most cloud service providers will address those concerns and come up with an answer. The same applies, I think, to SRAMS 2, where there are some concerns about the ability to meet the GDPR requirements. Now, I'm not a compliance expert or a legal expert, but there are some concerns, and the cloud service providers, especially AWS, that I've seen, have responded by saying, okay, you could address these concerns in this way, and they've provided some guidance in that area. So I do believe it's in the interest of all parties to overcome these concerns, and I think they can be overcome. And I think so. The short history of the cloud so far has shown that all those concerns will be overcome.
Yeah, and of course it's not fair to only look at the cloud service provider, but also look to your own applications. So, for example, some of the GDPR regulations, they require controls at the data level. Yeah, of course, we can look at AWS for having their data services compliant with whatever you need, but in the end, it's you putting data on their services. So I think there also the shared responsibility model plays a big role.
Of course. Yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah. So if you have to tell a real honest story, because we are a little bit biased, of course. We are AWS or public cloud fans. If you compare the TCO from a data center versus a public cloud landing zone with all the things you need to get your application up and running, What differences do you see in this area?
So what I see is, first of all, it's very, very difficult to compare, right? If you look back over the past 5 years to see what you've consumed in your own data center, and you would project that on how much would it have cost in the cloud, then you might get an answer, right? But what you don't know is what your future needs are. So how much are your future needs going to cost if you were to realize them in your own data center? That might be a huge development effort. So if you look at it from a total cost of ownership perspective, you also need to look at the future, and the future is difficult to predict, but you can imagine a few things. And the other thing is that when you look at total cost of ownership, you really have to look at the total cost. Okay, so if you decide that running something in a serverless environment turns out more expensive on compute, you might be right. But have you looked at the total cost? Have you included all the costs involved in managing virtual machines or containers? There's a lot more involved there. For instance, you need to have people who know operating systems, who know how to secure operating systems. So I think, it is my honest opinion, if you look at total cost of ownership, that you're better off in the cloud. Yes, I'm biased, but we do have research reports which provide evidence in that way. Also, some of the lower total cost of ownership can be expressed in terms of less development effort required, more functionality per FTE, per employee. So I think if you look at it in the broadest sense of the word, I think you're better off in the cloud. But I think the debate is still ongoing.
Yeah, and it will be a difficult topic forever, I guess. But hopefully someday we will learn that public cloud is the way forward. I want to thank all the viewers, the audience, for attending this session. If you want to learn more and read more about the topics we discussed and more in detail, please read our book, our white paper. You can find it by scanning the QR code. Jeroen, do you have any final thoughts?
No, actually, I want to thank you, Stijn, for hosting this session. And thank all the viewers for watching. Hopefully, my voice didn't get in the way of bringing my point across. So I wish everybody a pleasant rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you, Jeroen. Stay safe, get healthy soon, and we will talk to each other later. Bye.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.